If we consider the activities of our day-to-day lives, then it quickly becomes clear that typography plays a massive role. It completely surrounds us, it directs us, it guides us, it seduces us, and it persuades us. Typography is essential to our lives, and it's essential for you, the designer, to understand some basic terms and conventions of typography. So let's have a look at the anatomy of typography. What is typography? Well, typography is basically the art and technique of arranging type in order to make language visible. Now, there's a great quote here by Ellen Lupton, and she writes that typography is what language looks like. Typography is what language looks like. So let's see what she means. Okay, so let's have a look at some basic terms and conventions. The first thing we're going to look at is serifs and sans serifs, and these are the most obvious terms that you'll probably come across. So first of all, a serif. Well, serifs are basically like the little feet that appear on the stems of the type. So it's the little extra pieces, and you'll see it on things that are quite kind of more formal, so more formal text. So something like Times New Roman is a serif font. It's got the extra feet on the stems of the letters. So sans serif is the opposite of that, and it's more informal and conversational. It can be more informal and conversational, and a little bit more modern, sort of laid-back feel to things. And a sans serif is from the French word sans, which means without, and it's without the serif. So it's the ligature, the text, and the glyph of the text without those extra feet on. Next, we've got a slab serif. Now, a slab serif is a serif font, but it's kind of meaty and chunky, and it's got a bit of body to it. It's a heavy font, and it's got those extra feet on the end that it's almost like it's made out of a big piece of stone and cut out of stone. Now, the opposite of a slab serif would be a script font, and a script font is elegant. It's kind of beautiful and elongated lines, and it's kind of almost like a posh font, I would think. It's based on old sort of handwriting and quill pens and things like that. What kind of music would that be? As you can see, we're going to look at this in the future, but typography has its own personality as well. So these things are there to help communicate. If you look at the video that I put up before about what design is about is about visual communication and taking a message to an audience in a language they understand. So the style of typography is going to help you communicate that language across, and that's what it means by this making language visible. So next we're going to look at Didone or Didone, modern, and it says it's modern font, but it kind of is almost like 1920s jazzy kind of font, but it's kind of like 20s. So that kind of modernity, not modern as in yesterday. Next, we've got Roman type, and Roman type generally is a serif typography, so like Times New Roman, it's where the Roman part of Times New Roman, and it's a sort of manuscript style of the 15th century. So it's based on those kind of old Roman tablets, a stone tablet where they chiselled out the letters, and the little serifs that they put on the end was to actually stop the chisel from going too far up. So it's sort of those, and it stops it from cracking and breaking the stone. So a Roman type tends to be a serif, and it's that sort of old manuscript style. Okay, next is black letter type. Black letter type or Gothic script. It's sort of Old English typography, but it's a Germanic font, and Gutenberg, who made the Gutenberg press, in the Gutenberg Bible, the whole Bible was printed in black letter. And then the Nazis took it. Adolf Hitler decided that it was called Fraktur. The black letter font Fraktur would be the font of the people of Germany. And so it was sort of revived for Nazi Germany. And that was there for probably about 5 or 6 years. It was the font of the Nazi party. And it's sometimes misconstrued that black letter means it's a Nazi font, but you know, if we're looking at stereotypes, then if I was going to do an illustration for a Nazi illustration, I'm going to do a Nazi illustration anyway. If it was for like an editorial about a neo-Nazi party, I would probably use a black letter font. we're talking about shortcuts to understanding, basically. This is Gaelic type or Irish character, and you can imagine this at an Irish folk festival or on it kind of makes me think of the Titanic, so sort of Irish, those kind of pipe music Irish things. So it's some of these things are a little bit cliched, but again, you understand what it is straight away. Okay, so the next part of the session, we're going to be looking at the way of measuring typography. So the next part of our vocabulary is about measuring type, and this is where maths comes in. Maths. So typography is measured in different kinds of units. Typography is measured in picas, points, M and N. That's EM, EM for Emma and Mark, and EN for Emma and Neil. Who's Emma? So you've got pica, point, M and N. Now, 12 points, like a 12-point font, 12 points equals 1 pica. So you could, instead of saying, I'm going to use a 12-point font, you could say, I'm going to use a 1 pica font and look like a typography geek. So you've got 12 points equals 1 pica, 6 picas equals 1 inch. An M space, so we've got M spaces and N spaces. An M space is the width of the capital M in the given typeface, and an N space is half the width of an M space. So, and that's generally the width of a lowercase n. So you've got different kinds of spaces. Most of you will press the space bar, but actually there are different kinds of spaces. You can do an M space, an N space, and a space bar space. Okay, let's have a look at some further anatomy of typography terminology. So we're going to break down as though it's like an autopsy of typography. So we're going to look at the counter shape. Now, a counter shape is the shape that you find. It's the negative space of something like a P or a capital D or a lowercase b. If you imagine a polo mint, it's the whole of the polo mint. And that's the counter. It's the aperture of the typeface that's partially enclosed by a form or a letter form or a symbol. And you've also got bowls. So a bowl would be a 0. So a bowl really would be the space of a polo mint because it's a complete circle. So a counter is this sort of shape inside a P, for instance. And now we've got diacritic. And a diacritic is what you get in sort of Latin-speaking languages. So French, German, Spanish, Italian, they have accents over certain letters, and a diacritic is the accent over the letter. Now this one is pretty obvious. It's an initial. So you know that an initial is the capital letter at the start of a word, the start of a chapter or a sentence. But the initial could actually become more decorative. So you could have a drop caps, or you could have a decorative font for the first letter of your piece of copy. It would depend on what sort of audience you were trying to appeal to. Now, a glyph. This kind of trips people up, but a glyph is basically the shape of the individual letters. It's the form that letter takes. So Comic Sans has got a different kind of glyph to impact. You know, I'm going to make a meme, I'm going to use impact. So those kind of the glyphs are the overall shape of the letter, and they could also be the extra bits that are added onto a letter too. Okay, so some more terminology. Kerning, this is one of the basics that you're going to need to know. You're going to turn up to a design agency and you're going to look like an idiot if you don't know some of these terms. And kerning is what's going to separate you from the amateur in terms of designing. So knowing the letter space. A lot of people will stretch letters out. I'm going to stretch these things out. This font has been designed by a proper designer and you're messing around, warping it and stretching it and distorting it. So one of the ways to get this letter spacing right is to use kerning. And kerning is the space between individual letters. So if I've got the word kerning, the K and the E, I can change the space between the two, and that is kerning. So if I show you here on the presentation, you can see that it's the space between the letters. Bad kerning can cost you your reputation. It can make you look like a complete fool. Look at some of these. We're going to have a look at some, and these have cost people money. They've gone to print. It's made them look stupid, and it's on the internet. So let's have a look at Spruce City Minor Boys Softball. What is the registration for? That is final registration, but the kerning between the F and the I makes it look much more sinister. Next, we've got what is broken? The pen is broken. Please use your finger. That looked like it was going to be an advert for some self-exploration that we didn't want. Next, we've got the kids' sex exchange. Sorry, the kids' exchange. But it does look like it says the kids' sex change. What is a kids' exchange as well? Is that where you take your kids and you swap them for somebody else's child? I'm sure that's not very good either. And lastly, the local library has got some feature flicks. But yeah, that's unfortunate because it looks much ruder, and she looks like she wouldn't be smiling so much if she knew what it said. Okie dokie. The next bit of our vocab is leading, and leading comes from the old kind of fashioned typesetting where you'd have metal type, individual letters, and then you'd have a piece of lead to separate the lines of text. And so we still use that terminology, but we use computers, so there's no lead involved. But basically, it's the space between each line of each sentence, each line, each base line. And that can change, so you can make that bigger and smaller if you want to. So that's kerning and leading. Next, we're going to look at letter spacing. And letter spacing, which is also called tracking, is the space between whole words. So this is where people will go into Photoshop, type something out, it doesn't quite fit. I'm going to press Control and T to get free transform, and we're going to stretch it across. Don't do that. That's for school children to do. You're not a school child, you're not an amateur, you're going to use tracking, and that's going to change the spacing of the whole word without distorting the letters that have been so painstakingly designed. The next thing is a swash, and a swash are the extensions of the glyphs, these kind of like lovely typographic flourishes to the text. And you get these lovely swashy kind of things going on. A bit like having a pirate sword and swashbuckling your way through. Okay, next we've got cap height, so that's the height of a capital letter from the baseline of a particular typeface. And then we've got the X height, and the X height is the distance between the baseline and the kind of mean line of the typeface. So if you think about the shoulders of an H, or the top of a lowercase e, or the crossbar of a T, where all those things generally line up, is the X height. Okay, so you've got cap height and X height. So the baseline is what all of the type sits on. It's the line which most of the letters sit. So you have a baseline that those kind of things sit on. Otherwise, the writing would be up and down all over the shop. So we've got ascenders and descenders next. An ascender is part of a lowercase letter that is taller than the font's X height. So remember, the X height is the mean height of all the lowercase letters. Well, let's have a look at what an ascender is. So you go from the baseline to the X height, and it's the portion that is above the X height is called an ascender. So obviously a descender is the portion of the letter that goes below the baseline. So like on a P or a Q is the element that falls below the baseline of that. Sorry, not a P, because a P sits on it, a Q, sorry. Now, you can find online loads of these sort of anatomy of type posters, but I would get yourself one. I'll put a link to one underneath or at the end of the video. But have a look, get yourself one and have a look and start learning, because I've just gone over the very, very basics, the simple ones. But you've got strokes and shoulders and open counters and all sorts of ligatures and stuff like that. So have a look and get to know them. Get to know your typography, get to know your terminology, and don't look like an amateur, and don't make yourself look like an idiot when you go for your first job. So here are my do's and don'ts of typography. First of all, do give text a containment device. So if you've got a really complicated image, don't just lob type straight on it. Put a containment device behind it, like a black box or a dark box, something that is going to create some contrast between the background and the typography. Otherwise, if you put text over a busy background, it's going to get completely lost, your message isn't going to get to your audience, and it's a waste of time. Next, use different font styles. So try and marry different types of fonts together. So you could put a serif with a sans serif rather than putting fonts that are too similar. So putting Rockwell Bold with Meets Chunks 5 they're too similar. There's not enough contrast, there's not enough interest, and so your work's going to look a bit dull and boring, and it's going to have no hierarchy. Next, use 2 to 3 font families. Let's not go mental here. You want 2 or 3 font families and then do variations of them. So you could do lighter versions and bolder versions and play around them. So something like the Helvetica and Garamond together. So you've got the contrast there, but also different font families, those 2 or 3. If you use too many, you look like an idiot. You're going to look like you've making, your auntie who's made the Women's Institute poster for the last 5 years using Word and likes to lob every single piece of fonts that she's downloaded because she thinks she can design. Don't do it. Don't be your Auntie Maureen. Your Auntie Maureen cannot design. So if you're interested in typography, I've got 4 books that I would suggest you buy. So we've got Thinking with Type, we've got The Elements of Typographic Style, we've got Typography, spelt typography, and there is also Making and Breaking the Grid. If you get those 4 books, or just one of those books, get some kind of more interest in there. There's another brilliant book as well. It's called Stop Stealing Sheep and Learn About Type Instead, or something along those lines. That's worth having a look at too. So they are the terms and conventions of typography. Learn them, get to know them, learn them off by heart, and surprise your friends with your beautiful typography knowledge. Until next time, happy designing.